Welcome to the Future of Less Work, the podcast where we piece together the transformation of work one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today my guest is Kyle Forrest, principal at Deloitte Consulting and the U.S. Future of HR leader. Kyle and I first worked together, almost apologizing to say this, nearly a decade ago, in the trenches of HR transformation. And it's a pleasure to reconnect now, especially at a time when HR function is really being reimagined, right? If you've read Deloitte's 2025 Human Capital Trends Report, it doesn't just identify the challenges ahead, it offers a powerful lens for understanding what needs to change. So today we're going to unpack that and explore some of the tensions and opportunities shaping our workforce, from how we gain experience to what employees really want, and maybe how managers lead in a world with AI. Kyle, welcome to the Future of Less Work.
Nirit, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. And it is funny you say a decade because I don't feel like I look any different, but then my kids are talking about my wrinkles and my gray hair, and I'm like, it's been a decade.
Yeah, we're not going there. Absolutely not going there. But it has been a decade, and I kind of think of the world we were, in, and I've been following the Human Capital Trend reports for all those years, and they always do put really interesting frameworks around the things that we live and don't quite know how to, unpack and make sure we hit the ground properly. But I actually want to start by asking you a question that I know you've been dealing with this. What's happening to the entry-level market? I called this podcast The Future of Less Work.
Yeah.
Not because I think, there's going to be less work overall, but I do think we're going to do less of what matters, maybe more of less of what doesn't matter, more of what does, and then maybe have a different way of thinking about how our work and lives fit together. So I'm really curious to get your take on, what do you think is happening?
Yeah. Well, Nirit, gosh, I mean, so much has happened even in the last year. The last year has felt like a decade to a certain extent. And I'm glad that you and others have enjoyed the human capital trends that have been out there for about 14 years now. Global report, 13,000 plus people responded this year, 90 different countries. So a lot to unpack. Entry-level jobs very specifically. If you think about AI and automation technology, where people point it first is routine tasks, repeatable tasks, or things today that are like summarization, notes, meeting transcription, right? When I started my career 17 years ago, what is one of the first things I did? I sat in a meeting and listened to more senior people and took the notes and followed up, right? So of course, people then see those types of examples and say, what does that mean for entry-level roles, right?
Right.
And in one of our trends, we saw data that said entry-level job postings had been changing from 0 to 2 years of experience required to 2 to 5, right?
So how do you get those first two?
Right. So how do you get those first two, right? And I think there's a couple different things that we're seeing come into the trend itself, right? One is an acknowledgement of how is work changing and what can companies do differently, because you need a talent pipeline, right? You can't just say, I'm going to stop hiring early career people, because if you do that, in 3 to 5 years, where are going to be your future leaders coming from? You can't rely exclusively on hiring from the external talent market.
And I, by the way, I would add to that another thing that I think we're seeing, right? The things that people learn how to do by being in a company and watching people, right? I was tempted to say the human elements, right?
Yep.
The how do I interact, and role modeling of behaviors and role modeling of time management. A lot of these things, if you don't bring in the people when they're young, how will they learn how to do what you need them to do when they have 5 years experience?
Right. I mean, because just by virtue of saying, okay, I now have a better AI assistant, right, or AI coach, or whatever an organization is building and deploying, does not make me a qualified expert in the space, right? And how do you avoid what many people are now concerned about, the lack of critical thinking, right? If I've built a tremendous AI agent and bring someone in who doesn't know a domain, they might just take the answer at face value. How do you question? How do you probe? How do you understand? Does this answer fit in the context of my business environment, the relationships of the people that I work with, whatever it might be? And those things are gained through time, experience, context.
Well, it could be, you could also argue that we're just not preparing the younger generation for the right jobs. I mean,
Yep.
the people coming out of colleges today didn't study in a world where AI existed.
Right.
And they also went through COVID, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so a lot of these things that we need them to know how to do, because we do have AI, we haven't taught them and they
Sure.
haven't lived it.
Yeah, and I
Maybe
know
we
that
just push that
colleges
down.
are. Yeah, and I know many higher education institutions are at different points relative to revamping their curriculums to include usage of AI tools in the coursework. Right, I had the pleasure of going into a classroom in February as a guest lecturer, and when the professor sent me the syllabus, it said use AI and automation every class assignment, but cite your sources. Prove to me that you're not just repeating or taking things at face value, right? But to your point on how are we preparing people for the world of work, right? I've heard from some different leaders who are exploring different things, like bringing back and expanding upon leadership development programs. Like when you come in, you're not going to go straight into one role. We're going to put you through an 18-month development program. You get exposed to different parts of the business. So at the end of the 18 months, not only do you have more on your resume in case the decision is not to actually move into a full-time role, but now you actually have a better understanding of how the business should work. So you're more impactful in whatever full-time role you move into, right? So people are going to have to get uh, explore different ways of that skill building, talent building, experience building models within their organizations.
Well, what that means that the organizations, though, need to think differently about what they're bringing people into, right? I mean, right
Absolutely.
now they seem to be focusing on letting people go because they bring in AI, stopping hiring, which we see in the numbers. But I haven't heard anyone say, okay, let's build a talent pipeline program.
Yeah. Well, also, I don't know that in the broad uh, publications that makes for an exciting headline, right? So there are stories that I see and hear as I engage with CHROs, HR leaders at various events and conferences. So I know that there are companies out there doing that, right? But in and of itself, that's not always a popular
Okay,
headline to go
which
explore.
is why we have this podcast, because I actually, frankly, I did start the podcast because I thought the headlines were all back to, right,
Yeah,
back to the
sure,
future is not a
sure.
direction. So, I said, okay, we need to give voice to actually the way people are actually trailblazing, right, new
Yeah,
ground. So what else are they doing in this space? So you
yeah,
talked
yeah.
about, apprenticeship or rotation programs. What else?
Yeah, so I'll stick with this experience topic for a moment, and I'll say, in our human capital trends report, our chapter that was called "Closing the Experience Gap" acknowledged this problem head on, right? And what we said, part of the problem is leaders identify experience as time and level, time and role, right? And our call to action is to start and say, what is the contextual application of skills that you need, right? So for starting a new project, for example, new market entry, new product launch, I might need some smart early career people who really know how to use the latest AI tools to pair them with a couple of leaders who have done market entry before, but
I
aren't
don't
as
know how to
comfortable
use
using
AI
the
tools.
tool,
Yeah.
right? Who don't know how to use the tools, right? And that's my new team, right? And that team can therefore move faster because I've got the right mix of expertise and the doing, right? And I have, it's interesting. I'll say a unique thing about professional services firms is the way in which we pair mixes of levels, expertise in a team model to bring something forward to an organization. In organizations, I've seen many, you know, in highly paid, highly experienced individual contributors who just can't move as fast because they might not understand the latest of the tooling, right? And so, how powerful of an impact could it be if you borrow a little bit of almost like that pod model to pair early career people who are there for learning expertise from a more seasoned professional, and that more seasoned professional can move faster, right?
That's
So,
actually it's really interesting. And you're also, I mean, you're hinting at if you're now an early career person trying to figure out how to get into the places that require minimum 2 years, right? Or a parent of one that just graduated college and can't find a job. You're basically saying go become um, best in class on the AI tools that are relevant to your profession and expertise, and lead with that basically to make that your entry level ticket kind of.
yeah, well, and especially, here we are mid July 2025, and there are organizations now saying things like AI usage is mandatory at our company, right? So if that statement is getting made, how does that then play out in the recruiting process? I'm sure it initiates a wave of questions like, tell me how you use AI. Tell me how you used it at school. Tell me how you use it in your personal life. Like, demonstrate to me that when you start on day one, we don't have to teach you everything about how to use AI and automation in your work, and you're already experimenting and creating.
Yeah, I actually heard another step from that basically says, I want to bring you in not because you know how to use the tools, but because you can help the people around you and elevate the
Right.
entire team. Which
Yeah.
which goes back to your wonderful story of pairing someone who's maybe an immigrant to this space, which we all are, but more
Yep.
of an immigrant to this space, and someone who is more natural in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that actually, I mean, even gets into the concept of general technology adoption. There's always your, fast adopters, there's the laggards, there's everyone in between. And that's true across generational cohorts, right? Now, you can certainly look at some trends and say, yes, over time, who tends to adopt things like the latest, greatest smartphone or AI tooling, right? Might they skew younger? Therefore, how do I have those people help with the adoption in a company? But it's also critical to find those folks that are more tenured who are fast adopters of technology, right? And then get them to help share with their peers and bring some of those stories to life. I
Yeah.
think one of the biggest problems of the senior, tenured, experienced people is companies not yet answering the question of, if I can do my 40 hours of work in 30 or 20, what's in it for me for sharing? Right?
Oh wow, I have a whole slide on this. I call it, yeah, the people won't. So we used to say, okay, if you got better at doing your work because of technology tools, usually they were brought in by the company,
Yep.
we just give you more work, right?
Yep.
Because it's an ownership model. I own you,
Yeah.
therefore I own all of your, time.
Yep.
I don't. I think there's a negotiation process going on these days, and people are
Yeah.
saying, you know what, I trained myself in a bring your own manner on a lot of these tools. And I also went through COVID that taught me life was short, and every day I go to work is a day of my life I trade. And
Yeah.
I'm asking myself questions about how much is enough and what does
Yep.
success mean and how do I want to live and work, right? Are you seeing that?
Um, yes. And what I would pair that up with are some of the things that are happening from a demographic perspective, right? 4.5 years from now, every member of the baby boomer generation will have reached 65 and will be retirement eligible, right? Granted, the retirement age varies by country. So maybe in some countries that everyone's already retirement eligible, right? Um, on the other end of the cohort or the retire generation spectrum is Gen Z, right? So people who were going through high school, college in a pandemic environment, who have seen other events around the world. They're like, where do I want to spend my time? How do I prioritize for experiences? How much do I really want to, is it live to work, work to live, right?
Yeah.
That whole phrase. And I think with both ends of the spectrum, you have people that are craving for something that is not just 8 to 5, 5 days a week, right?
Yeah.
And people who are hypothesizing that uh, baby boomers are going to be 100-year life, extended careers, but it's not Monday to Friday. Maybe it's 8 to 12 Tuesdays and Thursdays, right?
Yeah,
And so,
and
and
not
so
only baby boomers, right? We're seeing the other end.
everybody.
I gave a keynote at a conference today, and right before me, somebody was quoting her daughter, college age daughter, who said, "I'm not going to be like you." as
Yeah.
in work as you did, right?
Right. Right.
Um, he was talking to her mom, right? So we're seeing that from all ends, and then we're actually seeing. I actually did call this a future of less work, right? I mean,
Yep.
we're seeing a lot of trends that
Yep.
are asking for a different combination of work and life, and don't want to start living where work ends, like we kind of did for a while.
Yeah. Well, and Narit, this actually gets into one of the things that I think people are craving for in the workplace is more directive how we work guidance, right? When you think about work design, that is with some more explicit guardrails on how to do things differently from today. Don't just slap AI and automation on top and say, do this incrementally better. It is everyone's saying, let's re-question. Why are we doing this in the first place, right? Should a human do this? Your comment earlier around the routine work, right? Someone had this phrase, I think someone has put out that's like, there are BS jobs and BS work activities. And why did people ever do those things to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Now, at the other end of the spectrum, some of those things are the tasks where people just turn off their brain, right? As a chance to decompress. I don't have to think too hard, et cetera.
As a good thing, you're saying that, as maybe some people that's what they want, or portions of your day that's what you need.
Yes. So,
Yeah,
so, so in
although
that
I would
sense,
argue that that's a structure we needed to have in the old days, where we spent all 9 hours, and in my
yeah,
non-effective parts of the day, I
yep,
did my, tasks that I didn't need to think with. But in today's world, if I'm building the day differently or the week differently, I can be effective when I'm very, productive, and maybe I can go to the gym when I need to turn off my brain, and it could be in the middle of the
absolutely,
day, right?
absolutely, and actually, since March, one CHRO kind of painted a picture of the future for me, which was, what if HR is the function of neuroscientists? Because there's an understanding of the brain, and bringing that in to say, if I know these types of meetings and these types of decisions are difficult, high cognitive load, then we will deliberately design before and after the meeting space to pause, prepare, and then decompress, right? Go to the gym, go to the park, take a walk, right? And thus, I'm helping people throughout their day manage stress loads, stay healthy, have better mental and physical well being, thus drive business value because absenteeism is low, sick days are down, all these other things, right? Like, it's a fascinating direction that you could head in.
Yeah, I know totally. The only thing I'm thinking though is where that requires the ability to personalize and let go of kind of the wine size fits all
Yep.
and the control. And you do. I was going to go there. You do have this really interesting conversation about the changing role of the manager, right?
Yep.
Because in this world, maybe that's what managers need to go do. They need to center around the people and the personalization versus the process.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me touch on that, and I'll share just a few data points, because there's kind of three trends that really come together in my mind quite frequently in conversations. So one was a trend that we called unlocking organizational capacity, unlocking worker capacity. And the data point out of all the respondents, they said that 40% of their day is spent on non-value added work, right? Expenses, performance processes, you name it, right? So then clicking into the manager role and reimagining the manager role, like, that starts to include things like just firefighting issues, answering inquiries that people should be able to get answers for by themselves, right? It's not focused on the business. And then a third trend was around kind of motivating individuals, where the workers, so the survey data splits into two pieces, like a worker component and an executive component. Workers said like 68% of workers know what motivates them, but it was something down like 26, 28, or 30% of their managers know what motivates them.
Yeah.
So you think of the tremendous power of, if I can free up 40% of the manager's time from not dealing with this non-value added stuff, managers could know the workers that much better. Wow, like, how can I help you grow in your career, make better decisions, leverage my expertise in the work that you're doing? that is a whole new different ways of engaging and driving value, not only for the person, but then for the end customers of the work of that person.
Which would require rethinking managers' role in the
Yes.
organization, because the way we think of the managers today is they're responsible to herd the cow, the cattle to make the work or product
Yeah.
or whatever, in whatever means necessary. And we think of engagement and motivation as part of that. I'm not sure we lead with a human first mindset, which says that the manager's role is to make sure that they know what the employee is motivated with.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I think over time, companies of all shapes and sizes have grappled with um, almost the career trajectory in an organization requires becoming a manager, right? Whether
Yeah,
or not those people want to be a manager or would be a good manager, right? Being a people leader, being a people manager, um, shouldn't be a to advance must become, right? And I think there are some industries that actually have the right individual contributor, tends to be technical tracks, where you can be very senior in an organization without having to manage people because it's based on very technical expertise in a space. I mean, I know, Narit, you in this field that you've worked in probably know many of those individuals and have even probably interviewed some of them here. And so, how do you actually get more of that as an opportunity? And in the trends report, I think in the chapter, I think we also looked briefly at Bayer as an organization who has been in the headlines over the last year relative to changes that they've made to their middle manager population, where they had thousands of middle managers that they converted back into individual contributors, and had the criteria for a middle manager change significantly to focus on um, team leadership, true, how do you actually manage people and get the work product and decisions to move in a different way? And I know that they've been on that journey, so still kind of, but they've seen some measurable outcomes that they've shared that have been beneficial for their business.
yeah. I think that one's going to be interesting to watch, because the learning organization that we really need to put in place because of the speed of change, right, requires focusing on things that are not outcome and productivity and today, here and now kind of work. And
Yep.
I don't think we've set the management structure for that. We don't have the measuring systems and the performance systems, like you said, the motivational systems. But that brings me to another one that I thought was really interesting in the report. I think you called it Stagility, right? Stability and agility, which I thought was perfect, because we do have these two extremes going on, right? And we're trying
Yeah.
to stabilize. We're human, right? We like
Yep.
the ground doesn't move under our feet, but
Yep.
it's moving.
Yeah, it is, right. And yes, I always laugh with that one. Like, a good consulting firm, we had to make up at least one word, but it captured what we saw in the data. 75% of workers want more stability. There's a lot of change happening in the world, externally and internally. Internally, I think the tenure of C-suite executives is down, so you're going through
Mm.
that many more leadership changes. There's also data that was saying, a decade ago, maybe every organization might have two big enterprise changes. Now that's up to 10. Then there's all the external things happening in the world, whether macroeconomic or otherwise. Throw in the technological change. So
Did you think,
75% of,
I mean, I get that we want it, right? I mean, wanting have answers and to have,
yeah.
stability, and it's wanting's good, but should we maybe, stop saying that it's possible?
Yeah. Well, so the workers want stability. 85% of executives that responded want more agile teams. So it feels in conflict, right? And that was therefore our call to action, is like, how do leaders help workers get comfortable with finding stability through being agile, right? Hence creating the word stagility. So to your point about even hinting at it's possible, I think every organization needs to say, like, no, there is no stability to business. Um, at business, being human at its core is about growth, right? Growth requires change. If you
Yeah.
just acknowledge these simple kind of tenets, as an individual on a team in a business, you will see change. Period. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. But the question is, for agility, right? Are organizations also willing to, or is the C-suite willing to go the extra mile to lose some of the control you need to create networks and agile work organization versus the classic hierarchical one, which is everything but agile?
Yeah. Uh, I think if I had my either hat on or my crystal ball in front of me, that the answer will be yes. Uh, at least, especially in the next 3 to 5 years, but it will probably lay the groundwork for the future. Because the speed at which we have seen in recent years new companies disrupt spaces, right? We've got examples of, in the startup world, fastest times to certain valuation or fastest
Yeah.
time to acquiring a customer base, right? So the speed of disruption for businesses, its
Yes.
new entrants is increasing. Therefore, incumbents have to build more speed into their decision making mechanisms or they won't survive.
That part, Kyle, I think is crystal clear. Nobody's going to argue that leadership doesn't understand they need to be agile from a business perspective. But we've been talking about the shift from hierarchies to networks in organizations for a really long time,
Yep.
and that has not happened. And you still
Yeah.
get them back to, conversations. So I guess
Yep.
my question to you is, do you see any indication that they're willing to really rethink how they're leading organizations to make them more like um, organisms and networks in a way that allows agility?
Yeah. Yes. And to your point around like we've been talking about certain things for a while. Um, yes, we have, right? Even our 2019 Human Capital Trends report, Deloitte introduced the concept of a super job, which is like use AI and automation and be better,
Yeah,
right?
I actually remember that.
But like what we could do then is fundamentally different than what we could do now, right?
Yeah,
It is cheaper to do it. You have many more ways. Like you can talk to AI. You can take a picture on your phone and upload it, and all of a sudden it's creating stuff for you. So like the super job concept, the super team that we then did in 2020, like those are realities now. So networked teams, organisms, right? AI as a technology requires data. It's only as good as the data you give it, which
yeah,
requires connecting across systems. There was a LinkedIn post this morning from a CEO that was like, organizational boundaries are breaking down purely because of the technology we're putting across. The lines are blurring. Our team's ready, right? I think there are organizations that are and that are leaning into it. There are many that are still like, I don't know, we'll see, we'll get there, but they will be forced to,
yeah.
get on the journey.
Yeah, I agree. This is going to be, I mean, this is a great time to do your job. This is going to be a really interesting time to see this transformation. So, as we wrap up, I always ask my guests, instead of for an answer, for a question. So I want to ask you, what's the one question you think we should all be asking ourselves about the future of work?
So, in my mind, the questions that we should be asking is, um, how do we help humans keep human sustainability at its core focus as we design what's ahead? And I'll explain what I mean by that. You calling this a future of less work, right? There's how do I live my life in a way that gives me purpose and meaning, in a way that I've got physical and mental well being? I can support a family or engage with friends or my community, right? All these concepts are wrapped up into it. And I think this human sustainability, topic is critical for us to consider all the humans being impacted by decisions that get made, right? I think in isolation, companies will make certain decision points, but at the societal level, will all those add up as being the right decisions for humanity, right?
Yes.
And so that's, I think, if more people are thinking that question, right, then where are we thinking about, if I go back to, there were some really interesting bright spots early COVID, talent sharing across industries, where it's like, we don't need people in hotels right now because no one's traveling, but we do need people over here. Well, let me share my available talent across industries. How do we do things like that in a way that's beneficial for all humans, that keeps society humming because people are employed and earning incomes and able to afford their life choices? So
Yeah.
I've now gone probably a little bit longer than you wanted on my question that I think folks should answer on, but I wanted some of that context for why.
Yeah, actually, I agree. It's excellent direction. I do think that a lot of that's not going to come because organizations will do that. I think it's going to come because we have the tools now to maybe evolve what we used to call the gig economy or the freelance economy, and people. If you bring that together with the way people want to work and live, maybe we'll figure out a different way to network for value, and then jobs and the
Yeah.
ownership model of,
Yep.
I'm part of a company. So when organizations think that they're going to bring in AI and fire people, and I call that the scenario of a billion-dollar company with no people, I always go all the way through the arc to end with, there's also the possibility of the billion-dollar person with no company, right? Because we
Yep.
have the tools at our disposal today to do wonderful things. So
Yeah.
maybe some of that exit from big corporation might actually turn to be a good thing for humanity, because
Yeah.
people will
Yeah.
work on things they're passionate about and they'll have the tools to do that.
Absolutely. I think there's fascinating times ahead, and the ability to create a future like that with those ends of the spectrums, in my mind, is why I'm filled with optimism and positivity. But you also have to be comfortable with the unknown to get through the other side to help create those things. So
Absolutely. Okay, that's a good one to end with. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kyle, for joining me today. For more about Kyle and his work with Deloitte and the links to the report, check out the podcast description. Thank you for joining us on The Future of Less Work today. And remember, your best people do not work because they have to, nor because you tell them to, nor because you measure them on it. They work because they want to, because by working for you is their way to achieving their own purpose in life. Till next time.